You probably think you've got your life insurance all figured out, right? But what about the real worst-case scenarios? Today, we're going to dive deep, way beyond the basics, and look at the tiny little clauses in the fine print that can literally make or break everything you've worked for.
Okay, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and start with a really tough question. Imagine this. What if you and your primary beneficiary, let's say it's your spouse, are in the same accident and you both die? It's a horrible thought, I know, but who gets the money? That money you so carefully planned for.
Now, you'd think there's a straightforward answer, right? Well, not exactly. See, the law does have a default setting for this kind of thing, but trust me, it's probably not the one you'd choose. And honestly, it can lead to some truly devastating outcomes for the exact people you were trying to look after.
So, this default rule is called the Uniform Simultaneous Death Act. Let's dig into what it is, and more importantly, where it has some serious flaws.
Okay, so here's the gist of the Uniform Simultaneous Death Act, or USDA. If you and your beneficiary die in the same event, and it's impossible to tell who passed away first, the law just makes an assumption. It assumes that you, the person who was insured, died after your beneficiary. The whole point of this is to make the money skip over your primary beneficiary's estate and go straight to your contingent beneficiaries, like your kids.
And that sounds pretty smart, doesn't it? I mean, the money avoids getting tangled up in legal messes and goes right where you wanted it to go next. Perfect. But, and this is a big but, there's a huge catch.
This is where we find a really surprising loophole. It all hinges on that one little word, simultaneous. What happens when it's not quite so simultaneous?
Yeah. What if there's proof? What if we know for a fact that one person outlived the other, even if it was just by a few minutes? This is where that whole legal safety net can just completely fall apart.
Let's make this real with a story about a couple, John and Mary. They're in a terrible plane crash. At 3:15, John dies instantly on the scene. But when paramedics get there 10 minutes later, they find Mary, and she's still alive. Tragically, she passes away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, just 30 minutes after John did. The key here? She outlived him.
So what does that mean? It means the USDA is totally irrelevant here. Because we can prove Mary survived John even for a short time. That default legal protection we talked about, it's gone. Doesn't apply.
And here's the nightmare that unfolds if John didn't have a special provision in his policy. The money, it doesn't go to his kids. No, it goes to Mary's estate. Then it gets stuck in probate, that long, awful legal process. Mary's creditors can now line up to take a piece of it. It might get hit with estate taxes, and John's kids, the whole reason he had the policy, they're left waiting, maybe for years, and they could end up with a fraction of what he wanted them to have.
So how do you prevent this disaster? Well, the solution is actually built right into the policy itself. It's a safety net called the Common Disaster Provision. And honestly, it's the hero of this whole story.
What this clause does is super smart. It just adds a simple time requirement. It says something like, hey, for the primary beneficiary to get this money, they have to outlive the insured person by a certain amount of time. Say 30 days. If they don't make it that long, the policy just pretends they died first. This little trick ensures the money goes exactly where it's supposed to. Just look at the night and day difference this makes for John's kids. Without that clause, the money's locked up in Mary's estate, getting picked apart by creditors and lawyers. But with the provision, boom, the payout goes straight to the kids. It's fast, it avoids probate, and it's safe from all of Mary's financial issues. It's incredible how one little clause can literally change everything.
Okay, so we've solved one major problem, getting the money to the right person. But the job isn't done. Now we have to talk about protecting that money from a completely different kind of threat.
All right, so let's say it worked. The money made it to your contingent beneficiary, maybe your child. Great. But the story isn't over yet. The next big challenge is making sure that money actually does what it's supposed to do and, lasts.
And this brings up a whole other can of worms, doesn't it? What if the person inheriting the money has creditors breathing down their neck? Or what if they're just not great with money? A huge pile of cash can vanish in the blink of an eye if you don't know how to handle it.
This is where our final safeguard comes into play. It's another incredibly powerful tool called the Spendthrift Clause, and it's designed to protect your beneficiary not just from other people, but sometimes even from themselves.
So, what does the Spendthrift Clause actually do? Well, it's got two main jobs. Job number one, it puts up a shield to protect that insurance money from your beneficiary's creditors. And job number two, it can control how your beneficiary gets the cash, like preventing them from getting it all in one giant, tempting lump sum.
let's get into the weeds a bit. So, for the creditors, the clause basically tells them hands off. As long as the insurance company is holding on to that money, creditors can't touch it. Then, to protect against, let's say, some impulsive decisions, the clause can force the payout to be in smaller, regular installments instead of one big check. It's a built-in budgeting tool, really.
Now, you got to know the rules here. There are limitations. That creditor protection, it only works as long as the cash is with the insurer. The second a payment hits your beneficiary's bank account, it's fair game for creditors. And it's also a one-way street. If the clause says payments are in installments, that's it. The beneficiary can't just call up and ask for the whole lump sum.
So, after all that, why should you care about all this fine print? Because this isn't just boring legal stuff. These clauses are the tools that let you control what happens. They give you a voice in protecting your legacy long after you're gone.
So let's boil it all down to the two essential safety nets we've talked about. First, you've got the common disaster provision. Its job is to make sure your money gets to the right person when the unthinkable happens. Then you've got the spendthrift clause. Its job is to protect that money for your beneficiary once they've received it.
You know, when you really think about it, these clauses aren't just fine print at all. They're your final instructions for protecting your family's future. Getting this right can be the difference between your plan working perfectly or your entire legacy being left up to chance.
And that really leaves us with just one last crucial question for you to think about. Does your life insurance policy have the safety nets you need to make sure your plan actually works? It might be a really good time to pull it out and check.